So thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed for my channel. And you were just mentioning before we got on the call that, or before we started recording, that it's like 9 degrees where you are today.
Yes, 9 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And for me, that is the perfect January weather. I mean, yeah, 65, a little bit warmer would be nice,
Yeah.
65 Fahrenheit. Um, but I will take this because I am from Massachusetts, which it's usually 0 degrees, like below
Mhm.
freezing, snow, ice, very cold there. That's where I grew up and have lived for all my life until the past few months, where I've been living in North Carolina, which is south and
Yes.
warmer.
Was your MS your reason for moving, or did you just feel like you wanted to try out a new place? What were your reasons for moving, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't mind at all. It's a funny question because I had a lot of reasons for moving. Definitely my MS
Mhm.
and my pain levels were a big part of the driving factor, but I also really wanted to change and a new adventure. And I'm 38. I've been divorced for a couple of years
Mhm.
now. Yes, I'm immune compromised in an ongoing global pandemic, so there's that.
Yes.
But despite those concerns and despite the concerns of like well-meaning family members and friends that I'd be moving somewhere where I don't have close family or close friends when I moved here, I just really wanted to have a fresh start, try somewhere new. Having lived in the same state for my whole life, it's been wonderful. I love it there. I still do my advocacy work through there. It's still
Mhm.
my primary residence. This is a temporary winter long lease,
Mhm.
but working for myself and having done so for the last decade, there's no reason that I can't work from anywhere.
Right.
So it was a lot of
Yeah.
factors, for sure. But absolutely the difference that it has made in my physical health has been fantastic.
Mhm. That's
Of
awesome.
course, I do struggle with heat intolerance, so I do worry about how hot it may get here
Mhm.
in the summer. And it was pretty hot when I first moved here in September. We had some very hot days where I really only went outside to go in the pool.
Yeah.
But it's been really fantastic, and it's
Okay.
the city I live in, Raleigh, North Carolina,
Mhm.
is really set up for people to socialize and be outside more often.
Nice.
Whereas the city and the suburbs that I'm from, we only get a few months a year where people really want to be outside. So this city is set up where even in the middle of my apartment complex, there's gathering areas in the pool, but also couches and outdoor heat lamps and fire pits and things like
Nice.
that. Restaurants are set up with year-round outdoor dining. There's year-round outdoor festivals and parks and things. And again, being immune compromised in a pandemic or having an autoimmune disease and needing to be very careful and conscious about your health, I feel a lot safer being outdoors, and being kind of an extroverted people person has been
Mhm.
really hard on me through the pandemic. Obviously, while going through a divorce, dealing with loss and grief and health issues and life,
Yes.
living with MS.
Mhm.
So this has been like a refreshing change. I guess that was
Good.
a very long answer to your question.
No, that's great because I know like I would have the concern myself, and I know other people with MS moving away from your support system because you're like, what will that be like? Because you don't have anyone like just in case you need to like the people who you normally depend on to help you with certain things, you don't have that. So like that would be a concern for me, and I know other people, but I'm really glad that it worked out for you because it's improved your health and you get a new adventure at the same time.
Thank you. Yes, it
Yeah.
absolutely has. And I don't want to discount my support system at home,
Right.
my family especially. Um, but I've also been fiercely independent, probably to my own detriment, always, but especially throughout my um since my MS diagnosis
Mhm.
7 years ago. At the time when I was diagnosed, I was married,
Mhm.
and I lived about an hour away from my family, my
Mhm.
immediate family. And truthfully, my ex tried his best. I know that. But he didn't deal with my diagnosis well. And he wasn't as there for me, I think, as ideally I would love for someone to. So I was very used to driving myself to my own doctor's appointments in the city, which is a lot farther than my neurologists here, which are also and I also had world-class neurologists in Boston, but also Duke Hospital here in North Carolina has world-class neurologists, which is another reason that I specifically picked Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
Duke, Durham, and they have a world-class neurology center. They have movement disorder neurologists, which I also need for my dystonia spasms, which are caused by my MS. So while it's been difficult to switch doctors, I'm used to being the one in charge of my own care, being my own best advocate. And, not to say that my parents haven't driven me to appointments or wouldn't, bring me a prescription or a sandwich or something if I needed it. I'm also very privileged to live in an area where I can take an Uber to an appointment if I can't drive. I can get groceries delivered if I don't have the energy to go and get them. I can do pickup. There are so many options now, and because of where I used to live and because of where I live now, like with those options, it's a privilege, and it's made things a lot easier for me. So it made me feel a lot comfortable to be able to move, and to also to know that my family's only less than a 2-hour flight away. And my mom would be here in a minute if I asked her to. And I'm so lucky to have that. Yeah.
Could you tell me a bit about your MS diagnosis story?
So I was diagnosed officially in early January 2016. But my symptoms probably started a few years prior to that with some numbness and tingling in my legs. However, I had been in a car accident and I had some bulging discs and back pain resulting from the car accident. And so I kind of wrote it off as from that. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I was deep in the hustle culture. Let's just put it that way. It's like I said, I've been self-employed for a decade now, but before that I was in corporate marketing, and I've always been a go, go, go kind of person. I've always been a bit of an overachiever, a little type A. Okay, a lot. So when I got sick, I remember I developed pancreatitis, and I had to have my gallbladder out, which was pretty normal. It was all routine, right? And then a few weeks later, despite the surgery going really well, my follow-ups were fine. Being able to eat normal foods again, or like at least eat enough food. You have to kind of be careful with your diet after you remove an organ. But I started to feel, I guess I called it at the time dizzy, but I didn't really understand. Like I just felt really dizzy and off. I actually had optic neuritis in my left eye. But I called my doctors, and my surgeon was like, it doesn't seem really related to your surgery. Like, you told me you drank enough, eaten enough, all of that. But, I think you should just go and get checked out. Like, just go, don't go to the primary hospital in the city, like go to the smaller one in the suburb, and like, just get checked out. And I was like, oh, fine. Okay. So I went, and the ED doctor actually just kind of blew me off, told me I had vertigo, and sent me home. And I was like, okay, great. So I'm crazy. Thanks. Medical gaslighting. There's nothing wrong with you. It's probably on your head, but like, just go home and drink some water. Like, I wasn't dehydrated, but that's what he said, right? Excuse me. So a few weeks later, it hadn't gone away. And I was still working, living my life, driving. I don't recommend these things, friends. But I took it upon myself to make an appointment with a neurologist in Boston at one of the best hospitals there, and that I had my previous medical history with. And I went in and I drove myself, like, don't recommend. But I was just fiercely independent. I was like, of course I can do this. This is fine. Everything's gonna be fine. I was in complete denial. Um, and the neurologist looked at me and she looked, and you knew instantly like this was something that was wrong. You know, the way that she looked at me, and she didn't say anything in
Yeah.
particular, but you could tell in her face and in the face of her fellow, one of the residents that was there, you could
Yeah.
tell. And so they immediately scheduled me for a spinal tap and an
Mhm.
MRI,
Mhm.
and then got me a follow-up appointment with an MS specialist neurologist, the head of neurology department at Beth
Mhm.
Israel, who is still my primary neurologist today.
Mhm.
And even through that, I thought, this is fine. I was like, well, maybe I'm dying. Let's go on vacation. I don't know. Like,
Mhm.
it's probably fine. It's probably nothing,
Mhm.
right? Even though all signs in my life, like all the other tests, they did blood
Mhm.
tests and things,
Yeah.
everything pointed to MS. It was very
Mhm.
clear. In hindsight, it was very clear that it was MS. But to me, until the doctor said those words, like on January 13th, 2016,
Mhm.
I did not have MS.
Right.
And that was like the whole glass house shattering around me. And of course, I just had a spinal tap the day before, so I even wasn't supposed to be like sitting up.
Right.
But he spent a great amount of time with me, like
Mhm.
almost 3 hours with me, and my mom was there with me too
Yes.
that time. I knew better than to go by myself by that time.
Mhm. Yes.
But he went over all of the disease modifying therapies,
Mhm.
and there's over 20 of them, maybe
Mhm.
even more now,
Yeah.
and all of the options, and all of the statistics, and you're kind of playing Russian roulette with your life because we don't really know which one's going to work for you. Everyone's different, but I like statistics. I'm in marketing and business, and
Yep.
I was like, okay. And because of some other things and medications going on in my life, the I wanted to go, and with my doctor's recommendation of like the latest studies showing that if you get on the higher effectiveness effect, I don't know what the word is, the more statistically more
Mhm.
effective medications
Yes.
earlier on, you
Mhm.
generally have a better disease course. And I'm like, yes, bring it on. I'm going to be fine. This is
Yeah.
fine. Nothing's wrong. Like, we're going to just continue living
Mhm.
like I live. And I'll do infusions every 4 weeks with Tysabri. And then I was like, okay. I hadn't, I told my close family and friends,
Yeah.
obviously, like, still there was a lot of denial. There's a lot of
Yep.
grief. There was a lot of me making everyone else feel better about my diagnosis, as I'm sure anyone with a diagnosis
Yep.
like that is familiar with.
Mhm.
And my neurologist did recommend that I see a therapist, which
Yep.
in hindsight was such a gift. And even though she told me about like the stages of grief and grieving your old self, and at the
Mhm.
time I thought she was like way off.
Yeah.
I apologize to her now. Like, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, she's totally right. But I digress. When I went to the day of my first infusion appointment for Tysabri, my nurse at the infusion center, one of them called and told me that despite my ex-husband's in a union, he had Cadillac level insurance, the best of the best. I've never had an issue.
Mhm.
Despite that, she called and said that my insurance has denied my claim for the medication, and that they need me to do something called step therapy or fail first therapy, which is where I have to fail on a statistically less effective, older, but yet just as costly here in the United States medication. And then after that, like, which I didn't know a lot about MS at the time, but I knew failure was bad, bad stuff. I was like, that was brain damage, spinal damage, like, steroids, hospital stays, like loss of abilities. I was 31 years old. Like, I was like, oh, hell no.
Yeah.
Oh, hell no. For me, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
And the medication that my world renowned neurologist and I decided on isn't going to work for you. Over my dead body.
Yeah.
And again, I don't recommend this, but I actually went anyway. I was like, you guys bill me. No, I don't have 20 grand. We didn't have, my ex and I, we didn't have 20 grand. Probably didn't even have 20 grand in equity in our house. Like,
Yes.
I had no idea how much it was going to cost. I didn't know the statistics of the rising drug prices. I wasn't involved in advocacy. But I knew, I was like, no way, not
Mhm.
happening. You messed with the wrong girl.
Mhm.
And after that, thankfully, my doctor's office was very skilled in appealing, and we
Mhm.
did get the appeal after some time. And there was obviously some very unnecessary stress from
Mhm.
that issue. But after that, that's when I was like, I gotta talk about this. I gotta
Yeah.
speak up, because I have such a privilege that not everyone has. I mean, I knew I had a support system.
Mhm.
I worked for myself, so it wasn't like I had to not disclose to
Right.
any employers.
Mhm.
My background is in marketing and social media marketing, so I knew I had an audience and a
Yes.
platform. I'm comfortable with public speaking,
Mhm.
and I'm comfortable with calling people out on things that
Yeah.
are not acceptable.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm a white middle class woman in a suburb with a state that's very pro health and medical and best hospitals in the world,
Yes.
and we care about your
Mhm.
health here in the state of Massachusetts,
Yeah.
and liberal leanings somewhat in the states. And I was like, I'm a white girl. I don't have any like strong accent. Like people take me seriously because of who I am and how I look.
Yeah.
I'm like, no way am I going to be quiet about this.
Yeah.
And I haven't shut up ever since because I feel like while it's traumatic for me to relive, so to speak, my MS diagnosis and the journey, I think it's also very therapeutic. Coming from years of therapy, to begin to process it. And my hope is that if my story can help anyone to feel like they're less alone, that's why I share. I
Mhm.
think that's why I do this primarily. And
Mhm.
I want to change the whole world, but yeah, there's that.
Are you still on Tysabri, or have you had to switch to any new disease modifying therapies?
I did switch a couple of years ago,
Okay.
in the summer of 2019. I switched to Ocrevus.
Okay.
I did have a couple of
Mhm.
flare-ups on Tysabri. I've
Mhm.
developed some new symptoms,
Yeah.
and symptoms that haven't gone away, of course.
Mhm.
Although some have. I've
Yeah.
rehabbed, and things. But I switched to Tysabri in the summer of 2019,
Mhm.
and I'm still on that disease
Okay.
modifying. I mean, I switched from Tysabri to Ocrevus in the summer of 2019,
Okay.
and I'm still on Ocrevus today and due for my infusion here in a week or two.
Okay. And that's going good for you? Like, you've had no relapses well on Ocrevus,
I've
or
had a few
maybe
relapses. In
okay.
fact, last year I think I had one of the worst relapses I've ever
Okay.
had, unfortunately. But last year it was my infusion ended up being delayed by
Okay.
almost 2 months
Yeah.
because I had a MRSA infection, a skin infection, and then I ended up having sepsis. Um, Even though thankfully, still working from home, being very careful and shielded, COVID safe.
Mhm.
Yeah, of course, my body was just making its own germs.
Mhm.
And not responding to antibiotics and things. So I ended up having sepsis. So it was delayed first for the MRSA, and then it was delayed because of the sepsis, and then because it was delayed over 2 months, my assumption is that plus the stress of
Yes.
those infections on my body, I then had a pretty bad flare up in the end of
Mhm.
March
Mhm.
of last year. I
Mhm.
had a really hard time standing up, like
Mhm.
even standing up off my couch.
Yeah.
My left leg, I still struggle with.
Mhm.
It just feels heavy. It's not a foot drop exactly. It's more of just like left leg doesn't want to walk with right leg. And you're like, hey, come on, left leg, get with the program.
Mhm.
So I still do my physical therapy and strengthening exercises, and I still use a cane when I need it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can vary from day to day or hour to hour. It's a very dynamic disability for me. And I've learned to, I guess, embrace it the best that I can,
Yes,
because
that's right.
there is that, catch 22 where you want to work the muscle in the leg, but also at what point am I just using that excuse as my internalized ableism to not walk with a mobility aid?
Right.
Because we all struggle. I think everyone I know that's been diagnosed with a disability, especially later in life, but anyone in today's society has some internalized ableism and internalized bias. And
Mhm.
for me, that's something that I want to push through. I'm very stubborn. I'm very independent, right? Like I said, I don't like to ask for help, although I've really gotten a lot better at that, I promise.
Yeah.
But so, it hasn't been easy, but I'm so very grateful now more so than ever for the good days, for when I feel well, for feeling really good in this weather right now, and the
Right.
reduced level of pain, and the things that I am able to do. I know that in my conscious brain.
Right.
It's the unconscious, the subconscious, the internal
Right.
things. And I've worked really hard
Mhm.
to reform my mindset
Mhm.
and journal and therapy and
Yeah.
all kinds of things. But that doesn't mean that I still don't struggle with it. And I'm grateful I have friends that point out to me when they're like, "Hey,
Right.
Jenna, just let me help you. Okay." Like I have a great friend here who's going to drive me to my injection appointments in a couple of weeks. And she's like, "Just let me help you." And I'm like, "Okay, thank you."
Yes.